it's Rogaway here, and today we are looking at an intro to package design using Adobe Illustrator. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about sort of package design in general. Obviously, packaging is something that we, go and work with every day. Whenever we buy a product, it's packaged in something. And the designers who are responsible for that work in usually a program like Illustrator to create that packaging design. And when we're looking at a design in packaging, we're always looking at what's called the die line. And the die line in this case, and as you can see from my browser search here for die lines, is basically the flat version of whatever that product is going to become. Okay, so the flattened art file where our artwork would go onto, and when it actually gets printed and assembled, it becomes this sort of 3D object. And that's how die lines and packaging works in general. So yeah, that's what that looks like. It's it's 3D for you to understand. I don't know what that means, but anyways, you get the idea. You got a die line, and it's going to become a product once it's printed and folded. So in the tutorial folder, we got a bunch of files, and the one we're going to try to do today is the Wrigley's 5 gum box, because it is a very unique sort of package design. It's really nice. And inside the folder, we've got fonts, images, we got the die line and that to start, and we're going to go through how to create this. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up the fonts. I'm going to click the first one, and I'm going to hold Shift, and click the last one, double click, and I'm going to install the fonts so that they are on my machine. If you get a little warning, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. If this comes up, just click the little check mark and install the checked, and it'll be on there. Okay, then we're going to go back a folder, and we're going to open up die line start. It's an EPS file. And every time you see EPS, you know that that's going to be usually a vector file. And so we can double click it, or I can just drag it to Illustrator and get it going. All right. So, okay, there we go. This is the file. And I'm going to press Command 0 so I can see it closer. You're going to notice in this file what I did is I found a flat 5 box, basically taken apart. And I traced it, and you'll see my layers here. The original is the original box, and there's the trace with the die line. And I just want to talk really briefly about die lines, because that's an important thing to talk about. Again, if you're working in packaging design, you need to know a little bit about die lines. So this is the die line, and you can see it's basically the flattened version of this box that we're going to create. And whenever you see a solid line on a die line, that means that is where it's going to cut. All right, so wherever there's a solid line, that's the cut line. If you see a dotted line or a dashed line, that's where it's going to fold. And in this particular die line, we also have what's called a glue area. So you can see these lines that are kind of filling the flaps of the box. That is the glue area. Generally, you do not put any ink in the glue area, but for this box, we will. Just for the sake of the tutorial. We also have this green line that is around the outside of our die line, and that is called the bleed area. And if you remember what bleed is, that is the area that the artwork needs to extend to, so that when it goes to get printed, in case there's any movement on the press, it's not going to just create a white line. It's going to have color or something there that it can actually look like it was bleeding off the edge of the page. Hopefully that makes sense. And again, that's a review from something we looked at before. So I'm going to turn on the original, and we're going to start creating this package design. Now the reason I picked this particular one is there's a couple of things that I can show you in Illustrator that's going to make your life much easier when it comes to being, sort of precise and building a package quickly and effectively. All right, and so you'll notice that the way I set up my layers, I got the die line on top. The die line should always be on top. You notice that the die line's in a bright magenta color. That's always recommended that it stands out from the rest of the artwork. We've got a design elements layer, and you'll notice that I put all the elements that we're going to need on the left-hand side of this document so we can build it. We got a design background, which if I turn it on and off, you won't actually see, but what I created here is a white box so that if I drag something, I'll just show you what I'm talking about. If I drag something, it will cut off at the bleed where it's supposed to. Okay, so no matter where I put this on the box, it'll automatically cut off at the bleed. All right, and the last layer is the original, which is the artwork that we're gonna be basing it off of. Okay, sound good? Cool. So we're on the design elements layer. That's where we're gonna start, and we're gonna start with these sort of ellipse shapes that are up at the top here. And if you have ever felt a 5 gum box, you know that these ellipses are debossed, which basically means they kind of stick up off the paper. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create those first. So down or over on the left-hand side, we've got the first sort of ellipse for that pattern. And I'm going to just drag that, put it over here, and I'm going to zoom in on it. I'm going to just show you a trick that you can use in Illustrator when you're doing repeating shapes or any sort of object within Illustrator. This is a really nice trick and an easy way of repeating things precisely. All right, so first of all, I'm going to shrink it down, holding Shift, and I'm going to get that more or less lined up over top of the original. Actually, not more or less. I'm going to actually get it lined up nicely. Now you notice I got my smart guides on, and I'm going to turn that off because it can get really annoying if I'm trying to do stuff precise. So that's under View. Turn off your smart guides. You can also turn off snap to point if you want. Anything that's going to snap can get frustrating, especially if you're trying to line up to something perfectly. So there it is. We'll get that first one on top. Another little thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to press Command K, and I'm going to set my keyboard increments. 1 point is actually pretty good. I might go less than that. I might actually go, 0.1 of a point, and I'm going to hit OK. And what that does is when you set that, now when I use the keyboard arrows on the keyboard, I can actually bump those shapes in tiny little increments so that I can get it perfectly lined up. All right, so that's with the up, down, left, and right arrows. Okay, so once I've got that one perfectly lined up, I'm going to hold the Option key. And I'm going to start dragging a copy, but I'm not going to let go yet because I'm going to hold Shift to move it in 45-degree increments. Now I want it to move perfectly across to the next ellipse. I'm going to let go right there. Now, if I wanted to do this really painfully, I could keep doing that. The problem with doing it that way is there's no way to ensure, no matter how accurate you might think you are, there's no way to ensure that it's going to go the exact same distance every time. So here's a nice little feature that Illustrator has built in. If you make a copy like what I just did, where I hold Option, hold Shift, drag a copy over, if I want to repeat that action over and over and over again, I can use something called Power Duplicate. And the way you do that is with Command D, and it will automatically repeat that action as many times as you press Command D. So I pressed it 3 times, and you'll notice that it repeated that 3 times more. And the spacing is perfect. All right, the spacing is completely accurate because it repeated that action 3 times exactly the same. Now let's say we want to take this row of ellipses and get it down to this row of ellipses. So we can just click and drag a selection around so we've got them all selected. You can also hold Shift and click them each manually. And we can use the exact same trick. We can hold Option, start dragging a copy down to the next row, like so. And then we can press Command D, and boom, instantly we've got 2 rows of perfectly spaced out ellipses that are very, very close to matching the original. Okay, so that was an easier way, a much easier way of doing it rather than copying each one, manually placing each one. That'll save you a lot of time. All right, so we got those in. Let's jump to the back of the pack, and we're going to focus on this little Nice little typography element here of this guy, this little waste bin guy. And so now's a good time for me to mention that inside Window Swatches, I've created a swatch library for this box. And you'll see that those 4 colors are the ones that we're going to use. And obviously for this 5, or for this guy that's made of a 5, we're going to use the light gray. You'll find that element over on the left side. I've already got it. There he is. I'm going to select him. I'm going to set him to a light gray. And I'm just going to drag him over to the back of the pack. All right, and we're going to get him more or less lined up. Obviously, he's way too big. So we're going to hold Shift and we're going to scale him down so that we get him over top of the original typographic element that's there on the back. And remember, use your arrow keys and bump them into place perfectly. All right, and if I wanted to get precise or more precise, I could zoom in closer, but that looks pretty good. It's not bad. Actually, I might even, this is a big no-no usually, but I'm going to just stretch it down a little because it looks like it got distorted a bit. Okay, so I'm just turning off the original to check every now and then to see where I'm at, and you can see that that lines up pretty darn good. All right, now, this allergy information. Let's say we're going to get the allergy information and we want it to line up to the original text. You'll notice that over here I've got the allergy information, but if I turn on window type character, you'll see that I just put the information in Times New Roman, which is kind of just the default. Now you'll notice that that is not the correct font for the back of the box, but this is a really handy feature that Illustrator has. If you have the proper font, which happens to be this one right here, Helvetica New Condensed Bold, if you have the proper font used somewhere in your Illustrator file, then what you can do is you can click any of the text that you're using, press I, and you'll notice that the eyedropper now has a little T next to it, next to the icon. And what that means is you're not eyedropping color, you're eyedropping text faces. So if you click a font that you want using the eyedropper, it'll become that font. All right, so that's a much quicker and easier way to do it. It also matches the size of the font as well, and any sort of attributes like tracking and that it might have attached to it. This is also going to be the light gray. And what I'm going to do is just zoom out and drag it over to the back of the box, like so. And now I'm going to zoom in and get it to line up accordingly. All right, so we're going to shrink it down. Something like this. Now you'll notice that it doesn't fit perfectly. All right, the font isn't perfect. You'll notice that it goes off a little bit. All right, the one that I did line up is the bottom line, about as close as I could. You see it's not bad. Okay. But the problem with this text is that it needs a tracking adjustment. So the way you do that is with the text tool, you select the first line, and with the character palette open, and if you don't have it, window type character, you're going to adjust the tracking value here a little bit for that first line. And for the second line, we would do the same thing. Tracking adjustment, bring it in a bit. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's going to be a lot closer than it was originally. All right, and I can just check that, and it looks pretty good. Not bad. Command 0. I'm going to take the 5 now, and I'm going to just bring the 5 over. Pretty easy there. I'm going to shrink it down. And we're going to get it down to size here. Something like this, right over the original. Okay, if it's not perfect, I'm going to get in closer just to kind of get it lined up a little better, but it doesn't have to be 100%. Okay, something like that is pretty good. Okay, and now we got this little element here, the Elixir text, and we got this droplet. Okay, so the Elixir text we'll find over on the left side here. There it is. We're going to use the same trick we used with the ingredients. Okay, this time we're going to be using the font Pagnon, if it's French. Otherwise, English would be Pagnot. I'm not sure if it's French or if it's English or maybe something else. I don't know. But we're going to press I. We're going to click this text. All right, and remember, just to show you that again, you have to have the text selected. Then you press I, click the text you want it to become. All right, and it'll do it. And we're going to set it to this sort of fuchsia color that we have, sort of maroon fuchsia color. I'm going to copy that, or in this case, I'll drag it over. And Command 0, bring it over. Now, I tried my best to match the font, and I know it's not perfect. But we're going to get this in here. And again, I'm assuming they're either using a custom font or a font that I don't have. So in this case, we're going to line it up as best we can. We're going to do a tracking adjustment here. We'll get it close. Something like that. You'll see that the R and the X is a little off because, like I said, it's not perfect font. But we've got it more or less in place. Okay, pretty good. Now, for this little droplet, now, it's possible that that droplet would have been made in Illustrator, but I doubt it. Unless they were using gradient meshes or something, it'd be quite difficult to make a sort of graphic like that with Illustrator just because of the nature of vector in general. So I've supplied this graphic as a raster image. It's a Photoshop document, so if I go to File, Place, we're going to look for the tutorial folder, and it's called Droplet. It's inside of Images, and we're going to go Droplet, Place, and you'll get a little preview, so you click, and this one is just a matter of putting it exactly on top of the one that's in the original, because I didn't change the size of it. Okay, and you should have that in there. Okay, Command 0. The back is now done. All right, back is finished. Perfect. Next, we're going to move on to these little 5s along the side. And we're going to use that same trick that we used with the duplicate, power duplicate. So we're going to press Option. We're going to make a copy first. And we're going to rotate it. Hold Shift while you rotate. Okay, and remember to rotate, you go outside of the box, outside the corner, until you see that icon with the arrows, and then hold Shift, rotate it, shrink it down, hold Shift while you shrink it down so it doesn't get all stretched out of sort of proportion. I'm going to zoom in on that 5, and I'm going to line it up as best as I can. Something like that, maybe a little more from the top. Okay, something like that. And now we're going to use that same trick as before. I just pressed Command 0, but I'm going to zoom in so I can see the entire side panel. Because these 5s just repeat over and over again, then what we could do is we can press the one we just lined up, hold Option, hold Shift to move in a straight line, get it lined up with the second one, and then Command D, Command D, Command D. Oh, and it looks like I was a little off. So you know what? Let's do that again. Option, Shift, Command D, Command D, Command D. That's much better. Looks like there's a bit of a shadow even. And this middle one will become fuchsia. Don't worry about the trademark. Okay, don't worry about that too much. It looks like maybe it's off a little. It is off a little. So I'm going to bump these even though it looked like it was the right spacing. So I kind of went off of what I said about getting it perfectly accurate. But now to recreate the 5s on the other side, all we got to do is select, I'm just clicking and holding, select those 5s. It's going to be the exact same position. And go to your Move tool or your Selection tool and hold Option, hold Shift, and just drop it on the 5s on the left side. Now we've got the panels, the side panels done pretty quick and easily, as you can see. All right, now all that's left is the front, okay? And so there's a couple things on the front, little tricky. This here, the Elixir, we can easily just grab from the back. So we can click, hold Shift, hold Option to make a copy of it, go to the rotate, hold shift to rotate, scale it up so that it fits. It should fit pretty close. You might have to actually move. It looks like the position of the droplet, in this case it looks like the tracking maybe changes on the front of the pack for the text. I don't know why. That's weird. You would think it'd be consistent, but maybe not. There we go. We got that in there nicely. For the 15 pieces of sugar-free gum, it's right here. You'll notice that I have the 15 and the pieces of gum separate because the 15 is going to be bigger than this. But we're going to use the trick where we click it, press I. For this one, we're going to use Helvetica New Regular. And same thing for the 15. We're going to click it. We're going to press I. We're going to get that going. And I'm actually going to just bring it over and do the same thing. It's going to be with the light gray color again. You might notice that that font might be a little thick. I probably should have went with light. I'm going to go with light gray. Should have probably went with Helvetica New Light. That's okay. And we're going to first of all line up the 15. You'll notice the font's not perfect anyways. It's not exact. So we're just getting it lined up as best as we can. Hold shift all the time. Don't stretch your fonts out because that tends to look really, really bad. And I think I'm going to just give it a little bit of a tracking adjustment here just to get the gum to line up a little better. There. Perfect. Well, not perfect, but not bad. Okay, so there it is. Now, last couple things here that we want to do. I'm actually going to just ignore the serial number because that's not really necessary to do. But you'll notice these lines, and these lines are actually debossed. They are going in, and so we are going to take one of those lines right here from the left side, and we're going to bring it over to the front. Okay, and I'm actually, if you zoom in, you can probably line it up better. You can see these lines where it's like sort of a highlight or something that caught on the original. I'm going to line it up to sort of that left edge, to the left edge of that highlight. And this is going to be really easy. It's the same trick again. Option, click, hold shift, so it goes in a straight line. Line up to the next left edge of the next white line that you see. And then all it is a matter of pressing Command D to repeat all those lines. And they will be spaced out perfectly. And don't worry if the last one doesn't line up perfect. As long as you've got it like that, you know that those lines are perfectly the same distance apart. And they're going to look good. All right. Sort of the last couple steps here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to put in this sort of fire graphic that you see here. And again, that's probably made in Photoshop. It's possible it was in Illustrator, but I'm leaning towards Photoshop for that, just because it's got, you know, a lot of gradients in there, and yeah. So we're going to go File, Place. We're going to find the graphic called Elixir Fire. Place it. Okay, place it. Click. Rotate it. Hold Shift while you rotate it, and then we're going to drop it in place. Okay, use the arrow keys to get it sort of bumped into place as perfect as you can. And now we're close to the end. We're going to get one of the 5s from wherever. It doesn't matter. I'm going to take it from here, and I'm going to hold Option, and I'm going to drag it over. Now, one thing you'll notice is that Illustrator remembers the order that the objects were brought in. And so because we made a copy of it by using the option trick, it stayed in the same sort of layering order as this 5. So it's right now it's behind this picture. So we're going to have to go to Object, Arrange, Bring to Front, and now we can scale it up and it'll be in front of that graphic rather than behind that graphic. It's really important when you're working in Illustrator that you kind of pay attention to the order that you're doing things in so that it doesn't become a layering nightmare later on. Try to think about, what is the furthest back and work forward. So start with the furthest back items and work forward. Okay, so that's where we're at. Now, we got one last thing to do. We got this drop shadow here. And for that, we're going to use a little trick in Illustrator, which is super useful. We're going to click the 5 that we've got. We're going to go Edit Copy. And as long as this object, doesn't matter what object you pick, but in this case, we're going to keep this 5 selected. Whatever object is selected, we could go Edit, Paste in Back, or Paste in Front, depending on what we want to do. We're going to paste it in the back. So it actually pasted it directly behind that 5. Then we can set the fill color to the sort of fuchsia color that we have to work with here, and we're going to use the arrow keys to bump it down. You'll notice that Illustrator, like I said, was smart enough to paste the copy directly behind, and then you can use your arrow keys to move it wherever you want. Okay, so if you're ordering, your layer orders get confusing, you can use that trick by clicking something that you know and pasting your stuff either behind it or in front of it. With the direct selection tool now, so with the white arrow, we're going to have to move these points. You'll notice it's not just as easy as moving it down. We have to actually move this point and this point to match the curvature of that shadow. All right, press Command 0, and you'll notice now we got all the elements in there. All that's left to do is lock this layer, unlock background. And what I'm going to do for the background, design background, is I'm going to take a rectangle. Probably not the best way to do this. So I'm going to take a rectangle and I'm going to fill it with the dark gray. Okay, so the second darkest color. This one's black and this one's light. We're going to go with that one. And what we're going to do is we're going to draw a box to kind of cover up the whole entire bleed area. Okay, now when you look at that, we turn off the original because the original is not even showing anymore. When you look at that design right there, if you were to print that out, you would be able to cut this apart and make an exact replica of a 5 box. Okay, obviously the print quality and some of the things that we have in there aren't exact, but this would be good enough again to print and fold down and make an actual replica of this box. All right, so hopefully you learned a few things about how package design works and how to place your artwork effectively in a die line. Make sure you save this work, all right? Make sure you've got it, and use this for reference in case you get confused or you're not sure how to assemble your artwork in the packaging projects. Thanks for watching. Till next time, see you later.